Hey folks, Steve here with another Fleurus 1794 video. This is a post-mortem. Unfortunately, it's being recorded like a week after I actually played the mini campaign. This past week's just been a really busy week, and I couldn't get myself away to record, or by the time I was done with all the things I had to do in a day, I just did not have the wherewithal to get into the game room here and record. So apologies for that delay. Maybe it's a good thing that there's that much of a delay because I can distance myself a bit from the gameplay and having let it sort of marinate in my brain um, before talking to it. So I think first and foremost, and I think this is stuff that folks had sort of brought up in comments, and I mentioned in some of the previous video comments. I think I lose a lot of what makes the game system um, juicy, maybe is the word. I'm not sure if there's a more apt word than juicy, but for some reason my brain thinks juicy. I lose some of that juiciness without the hidden units, and I think there's no getting around that. I've definitely taken some time over the busy week. If I didn't have the energy to play or to do recordings, I at least had the energy to read some of the war game articles on OSG's website, which I've had for a while and I've read them before. And it's funny that, just for reading material, for all the times you need reading material, I had read those to kind of get a line on Zucker's design philosophy and all these things. And it's so funny that those things are good the first time you read them without having played the system, and then they're even more interesting to read after you've actually gotten a better handle on the game and you read them after. And I assume most people probably read those after having played it, but I did both, and boy, that's a very interesting experience. You appreciate it. It's like reading it for a brand new time when you read it that way. And I know that the hidden unit aspects of this make it more of a game than maybe just an exercise in mechanic execution when you're playing it solitaire. So what I mean by that is, I basically had to forego vedettes. Like, there's just not as much reason to have vedettes if you're not playing with hidden units. You might as well just have a light cavalry unit and do things with that. And that's still potent and that's still powerful. And you can still do that, basically, even with hidden units. You can still keep your light cavalry. But there's no reason to have vedettes, which means there's no reason to be really scouting in a particular fashion. Even if you're only looking at the top unit of a stack, even if you're playing solitaire and putting a counter on top to try to hide them, um, you still are going to kind of remember what they are, because when you're, say you're trying to forget what the Austrians did with that stack, well, you were just playing the Austrians. And so you kind of know what's there. Like you do and you don't know, and maybe you can try to forget. But I have a pretty good short-term memory, so when I'm focused on something, at least, my partner might not always think that I have a good memory, but when I'm really hyper focused on an activity, I'll remember it. And so, I just knew, like, there was no point in hiding those units. But if this were an opposed game, I think you have the option for feints that you really don't have without the hidden units. And I knew that going in, and as I'm walking away from this mini campaign, I go, gosh, so many things would have been so much more exciting if I just didn't know exactly what was going to happen. Now, that's not necessarily me saying, like, I don't think this is worth playing solitaire. I think it's still a fine exercise to play and kind of see what happens, because you don't know what the die rolls are going to be like, right? You don't know that. But it becomes more chess-like, and it's like, okay, can my light cavalry run up around their flank and allow me to get concentric attack? I I'm probably going to know that, when I'm moving, if I'm going to expose myself, except for when a combat that I'm launching as the attacker goes poorly, I have to retreat, and maybe I'm retreating now out of position, and that's when they can swoop in on me. But there's a lot of that kind of stuff where, I mean, obviously in this set of battles, um, the more likely you are, if you can make it happen, to roll up a flank, you're going to be in good shape. That's just kind of the way the battles could go during that time. That is something that no matter what era of warfare, you start rolling up a line, then you're going to be in good shape. I think in this particular battle, and even in this mini campaign for Charleroi, Charleroi, however it's pronounced. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not going to get it right. I'm never going to get it right. As soon as you start doing that, it gets easier to do it because the line just starts to collapse, and the forces are so few, and the maps are still pretty big. Like the whole areas of operation are still pretty big. That as soon as you kind of crack a line somewhere, um, and you've dispersed a fighting unit for a period of time, you are going to be struggling to get them back in. That's dealing with the recovery, so you at least got to wait a couple hours for recovery, possibly. Then they've got to actually roll to recover, and then you've got to hope that you're willing to let that officer be out of command for the turn to get them back on the board. And even when they come back onto the board, they're really not in a great position. So if you can start to achieve it, it's going to go really hard against the opponent. If you're outstrown in a very, strown about in a very long line, like all of my formations were supporting each other, I see sometimes like pictures that people have taken of their campaigns where, the units are a little more clustered, which means that, when you're doing the hidden unit movement, you can kind of like make it so like you don't really know what's there. Like there's a whole big blob of units and you don't really know what's in there. And I do appreciate that. I don't know that that would have changed much in this campaign because the amount of terrain that's here is wide enough that you really like you can't necessarily afford to blob up too much. You do kind of need to spread out a little bit and make sure that you're pressuring, say, the French on all sides, or as the French, you're defending your concentric circle in the early phases of the campaign to have a defense to defend Charleroi. Um, so I don't know. There's just something there, guys. Like I can't not talk about it, which is just I know this would be much more entertaining if it were an opposed game and I didn't know what was where. And gosh, even a single point of strength could mean the difference between rolling on the 1 to 2 chart or the 1 to 1 or the 1.5 to 1. And if you can't really calculate them ahead of time, um, and so you're really just not sure what you're dealing with there. Even if, I mean, without hidden units, if I really try to refrain from examining stacks, I still kind of know that an Austrian infantry unit is going to be something like 5 to 6 strength points. And a French infantry is going to tend to be 5 to 6 strength points. So I kind of know what I'm getting myself into, plus 1 or 2 for artillery or cavalry that may be stacked. Um, so there's that whole element of it that just I am losing, I am missing. The fact that this scenario has the balloon train and it's got a neat little mechanic to put aloft and be able to do reconnaissance at range is super neat. Unfortunately, the way I played it, it just doesn't really mean as much, which is a bummer. It is a bummer. The other thing I'm missing out on, and I did choose to do this, so this is on me more than anything, is I didn't use the cards. So, I mean, so there are cards here. You can see the stuff up top that kind of can give you extra movement. So what can happen is you might be doing the calculus and say, hey, infantry can move 4. I'm safe. They would need to move more than 4. I don't need to do anything except, okay, now they play this card that gives their cavalry 7 movement and their infantry 5 movement. Now that they are now dealing with some victory point considerations there, but that adds uncertainty. And it doesn't, I mean, had I played with the cards, I think that would have added some more uncertainty to it. At least with the movement, because then so you'd get that occasional like, ooh, they're a little more active this turn. We're going to do a little bit. We're going to be able to venture a little bit farther than my opponent thinks, so that kind of adds a little bit of the hidden advantage. Some of these cards, I mean, they don't seem like they're super duper powerful, but um, they can definitely be not all, some of these cards you have to remove per the instructions, but some of this is like, oh, well, that's just going to help your reconnaissance. Okay. Obviously, in a solitaire game, even that card wouldn't necessarily help a whole lot. Um, there's a couple of things that it would protect your vedettes, but um, some of these cards they're not hugely powerful. They don't feel hugely powerful. The counter charge might be interesting. Some of they're just a little they're little pushes, but there's always some kind of victory point influence. So you're either playing this card to get in it some change in victory points, or maybe it's a no victory point change, and you get a little something. So I could definitely see where, from a card perspective, playing with the cards would help solitaire, and probably would have helped this been a little juicier. I'm going to use that term now, juicy. Might have been a little juicier. We're basting our game with cards. We're going to base the game with cards, and it's going to make it a little more interesting. I could see where that might have livened things up a little bit. Now I keep saying this, and I'm making it sound like I didn't have a good time with the system in the game, and that's not true. I did like it, but it did get a bit dry at times and a little rote because I just knew where kind of everything was at, and I had a pretty good feel for what I needed to do all the time, and yeah, that chaos factor just wasn't there as much. And there's not a huge amount of opponent reactivity during your turn, other than artillery and just, I don't know, most of the time the terrain of this map made it such that I could almost never really get a good shot on somebody, either because they were in the forest or artillery was in the forest. There's a lot of crests. In the few places where we're in like a zone where maybe you could get some flat enough terrain to make some firing. Um, the defenders would probably would run behind the crest where they could, so it was really hard to get a good firing line for artillery. So while that is reactive, we just couldn't do a whole lot of it. So it was very much, I'm going to do everything that I want to do. Opponent's going to do everything that they can or want to do within their capability, and we're just duking it out that way. And these cards really could have made maybe some differences. I look at some of them, and they're not, I mean, there's some of them are actually kind of cool. Like I like this one, Cavalry Pursuit. So cavalry advancing after combat may follow behind retreating units and repeat the attack again using the charge rolls. A bit situational. You probably don't want to do this all the time. You need to find the right place to do it. Knowing that cavalry charges are kind of hard to do. And I recall Just a Guard commenting on the previous video that, like, yeah, the cards may help with cavalry charging. I think in this scenario you probably don't want a cavalry charge at all, because there's so few light cavalry, or I'm sorry, there's so few cavalry, period. Not even talking about the fact that you can't do charges with light cavalry in the current rules. Your regular cavalry or undefined cavalry, that's not called light cavalry, or specifically referred to as heavy cavalry, those two types of units, there's so few of them that it never feels like you want to risk them, because you really need them to work the flanks and maintain presence working the flanks. Their great advantage being surrounding a unit or getting the concentric attack. So even with the cards, I was looking through the card to say, are some of these cards making it more worthwhile to charge? Yeah, maybe very circumstantial. If we were talking about a bigger battle or a longer campaign where we had a much more reasonable chance of getting our cavalry back, I know that some games have some rules about getting units that have been permanently eliminated back, maybe over the course of a long campaign, um, or something, or if you lose a few, it's not that big a deal. You've got some reserve cavalry you can operate with in higher number. Maybe you're more willing to do that. In this battle, or in this campaign, I should say, the numbers of the formations on each side are just small enough that it never feels like you can afford to lose much. Everything's balanced on a knife edge. So as soon as the third column of the coalition over here got mauled so terribly badly, um, that was kind of it. I mean, it was almost like the whole campaign was decided when the Austrian third column became decimated, um, terribly decimated, and because they got knocked out so quickly all at once, which was good play on the French side of just finding the opportunity to get guys in and make it happen. Um, and then that all came from a combination of retreats, advances, and failed command rolls, which is about how the game system does it. Once they were knocked out to the degree that their morale was in a demoralized state as soon as those units hit the board. That meant a lot of those guys weren't going to come back, and they really didn't. And it became, the third column was basically a small cavalry contingent, um, trying to support the rest of the Austrian flank. I think the whole campaign was decided right then and there. I mean, catastrophically bad result for the formations. But in many ways, it's like, gosh, what can you do when that happens? I think in this campaign or this set of battles, you can't afford to have one formation knocked completely out. You don't have enough men otherwise to cover the amount of terrain that you need. And when we lost them around, I think it was around here. I mean, that's just opening the door to victory points here. It's putting, it's separating these other formations over here. And even if the fight was going, back and forth over here, I mean, you just can't have that big a line open with the door open to the rear, that close to the major road line, and you can start doing some pretty nasty stuff, knocking supply trains out, getting victory points for that. Um, and then keeping in mind, if you were knocking, let's say, the whole Austrian front over here out of supply because you snuck out as the French with some light cavalry, moving on the roads, bag their baggage train. The rest of that army doesn't disintegrate necessarily, but they are treated as demoralized for like the rest, basically the rest of the battle, unless they retreat back to a coalition supply place. And the same thing for the French. The difference being, I think, at various points we weren't that far from an actual French supply hex, so you could count, not counting the broken bridge there, but maybe over here, you could go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 hexes out and be in supply even without a baggage train. And that was something I almost forgot in the first battle. That whole thing, could be very bad, right? If you're demoralized or functionally demoralized because you don't have supply, which means in game, like in, I guess, simulation terms, it means like your men are worried because they don't have a safe route home potentially or to their stuff anymore. It's like they're demoralized, even though they're not technically demoralized. They can't advance after combat. Any units that try to come back off from being eliminated are going to have problems. And you definitely want to do that. Their initiative ratings are worse, which means that's when you kind of you can go for the shocks. Like if you can make shocks happen, or you can put things in a situation where you're more likely to get shocks, you definitely want those to occur, because you're going to have the initiative advantage. So all of these things do come together in a really, like, I do appreciate what the game system does. Um, in the way we played this, it was very much like it was a rego of the first battle. Difference being we had the approach to battle, and for some reason some of the reinforcements show up in different places. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but it is that way. Um, the French were able to get into a much better position, and I think that does go to show the advantage in playing the approach to battle. Um, that reminds me a little bit of our time with Prussia's Glory, where, yeah, that you could end up with a very different situation, one that is not going to be as bad for the loser of the historical battle. So that difference between, hey, it's the day of battle, you just want to see what happens. Well, if someone's in a bad position, maybe the battle's going to be decided a bit already, or it's going to be a major influencer. Or here, with this version of the battle where we could control the approach, the French were doing much better. They just were less stressed from the get go as the Austrians were trying to come down the road, kind of had some congestion, trying to get into the position that they wanted to be in. Um, and that enabled them to operate better. We picked a different place. Now, in that first battle that we tried, we did worse than the French historically did. But with the new go, we had a better position. We were able to take advantage of that without the stress on the ends of the French position. We could afford to make the play against the third column and collapse them. And from there, what was really kind of what felt a little drawn out and was kind of a bummer through the rest of the campaign. Maybe I should have called it and just said, "Oh man, this is a doomed scenario for the coalition." I kept it going because Charleroi didn't surrender right away. We were rolling, 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 and the unit that is the garrison here didn't surrender. So I was like, oh man, are they going to make it into the second day without having surrendered? But he did. So I'm not sure if you were to replay this mini campaign, maybe you get really fortunate and Charleroi never surrenders, and then even on the second half of the campaign, you're still fighting in the south with all of the victory points and in control of the coalition, where um, they could be the winners. I think that's certainly feasible if these guys don't surrender. But that's a 1 in 6 chance. So you figure on average, it's going to do if you have 6 turns, it's probably going to have surrendered at some point. So it is a time ticker down here for the coalition garrison. What happened with us was, yeah, they did surrender, maybe a bit later. I'm not sure compared to the historical time. And that kind of sealed the deal because there was almost no way. I mean, we made some conscious effort by trying to dash somebody down here. We just didn't have the time to do it safely and keep them in supply, which meant that by special rule, the whole coalition army needs to head north. And I took a chance with the fifth column to try to make that dash. Maybe what I should have done is said, we're not going to get it. It's not going to happen. We just start pulling away right away, start retreating, start getting pulled back, and maybe we'd be in a better position for the second day. Because the French did certainly try to pick off the coalition forces that were trying to retreat where they could. They bagged a couple units, but not many. And even when we were fighting up here, the losses that the coalition had suffered were so bad that it kind of wouldn't have really mattered how well they did in the second half, because they were operating from such a deficit that eventually, we were starting to say they were going to collapse. They were going to collapse. The French would have like a whole second half of a day to move in and control the victory point hexes on the north map. I mean, just super mega victory for the French. I don't think there's much that we could have done better as the Austrians. If I guess the way that the Austrians could have done better, the Austrians and the Dutch, I should say, the coalition, is if we had avoided the third column, that would have maybe given us a stronger play to get down south into Charleroi, or at least disrupt the French such that we could have rolled up their flank or something. Who knows, right? If the third column hadn't collapsed. But it probably would have been that we still have to retreat to the north map. But if the coalition army was in relatively good shape when that occurs, rather than suffering a whole formation collapse and another starting to get picked off, like the fourth column was starting to get crushed, if all of those formations of the coalition were actually in good shape and we went north, then I think the second half is much more entertaining because it's more even. The strength points are still more even, and we're just fighting in different terrain, trying to cross a series of streams. It's kind of hard to see at this angle, and I don't want to move the camera around too much. There's a lot of east to west streams over here that the coalition was trying to anchor their defense on. I think they could have done a much better job defending across those streams and the marshes. And the French would have had a harder time, making headway somewhere to win or to get victory points. It would have been much more interesting. But again, that first couple days ended up becoming so critical to the long stream of things. Maybe I should have called it early. I wanted to see what happened. I got to enjoy that. it did end up feeling a bit long because I knew what was going to happen, and I played it through. So maybe those you know, last several turns weren't terribly exciting because it was just the French picking down the coalition army, and I still don't feel like I have a good sense of when's a good time to try to retreat, do a general retreat just off the map entirely. Um, I don't think I have a good feel for that because it's only worthwhile doing if you've already bloodied your opponent enough that you can get some victory points, and then you're saving your units. If you've already lost too many units, a general retreat is probably not going to make up a victory point differential enough for you to win. Um, somewhere in the math, there's a cutover point, and I think by the time we were really needing to pull back, it was too late for the coalition to try to make any of this up by pulling back off the map. And if they pull off the map, you're basically ceding the victory point hexes to the French that can run somebody up the main roads and capture those. So maybe a general retreat doesn't really make sense at any point in this campaign for the coalition. Maybe other than, well, I don't know. If they had not gotten mauled so bad, maybe there's a good time to have tried to do it, or do it in a very fighting retreat rearguard action way, which I think is kind of what happened historically. But we were just in too bad a shape to even try doing that at that point. So to summarize all of this, guys, I think my time with the game system and reading the design notes and just understanding it, I do think there's a very solid game system here that I do like to play. I think the cards can add some things to it, and maybe I'll play with cards the next time I play the game, play the system rather, and whatever, I'll probably do Bonaparte overruns Piedmont next when I play the system. Probably want to play with cards, and then unless I'm playing opposed, which could very well be the next time I play the system, I'm still going to have to just deal with the dried out steak of solitaire play a little bit because of there's just elements of this system that I simply am not experiencing. There are the cunning moves and feints and trickery just doesn't apply here. The unknown of committing forces to an attack that may go terribly poorly and then forcing an attack or retreat situation that will render my army very exposed. That stuff isn't quite happening as much as could be happening, and I think that's a factor. But still, this was a good run through. I appreciated the mini campaign format. The approach to battle made things a little bit interesting, a little more options open kind of thing. And the transition to the second phase might have been more interesting if the coalition hadn't gotten smacked so damn hard those first 2 days. But that's about it for now, guys. I'm enjoying the system. There are things I have to accept that I'm not going to enjoy as much as if it were an opposed game, but I can certainly have an opponent for the series. I know a couple of guys who either already like it or want to play it, so I do think I have opposed games in my future with some opponents who want to play it, and I've got the counter sleds to do it with. So it's all good news here, guys. I'm looking forward to being able to do that. This was an interesting exercise. Took up a lot of table space with the map, the stuff over here, stuff over there, and then just trying to keep myself organized. There's a lot of table space required. Fortunately, I had it to operate with. I can only imagine what this table will look like if I try to do the whole Waterloo campaign, which I do want to do at some point, likely with opposed players. I think that would just be a hoot. So anyway, video's almost 30 minutes, so hopefully this was a nice little catch-up for you guys on how I'm feeling on the system. We'll be switching gears to some other game systems here in the very near future, but I enjoyed my time with the Library of Napoleonic Battles. Keep an eye out for more content on this series in the future, because there's a lot more Napoleonic wargaming to do here. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Take care. Keep gaming. See you in the next one.